I guess we're live. Julia, you got to turn on your microphone.
Far.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right.
So I am Julie Schumacher, and I am delighted to be introducing Julia Claiborne Johnson and her terrific new novel, which I have here on my lap, Better Luck Next Time, which is, drum roll, the January Barnes & Noble Book Club selection. So thanks to the folks at Barnes & Noble, and thanks to readers out there who keep authors and bookstores alive. But mainly, I want to say I'm excited to talk to Julia. I first read her book after the publication of her debut novel, Be Frank with Me, which is hilarious and clever and sad and wicked and funny. And if you haven't read it yet, you know, run, don't walk, and get a copy, because we're done talking about, there it is.
There it is, yes. How
Better Luck Next Time, and I can tell everyone that Julia grew up on a farm in Tennessee, so she does have a little bit of a twang in her voice, but she now lives in LA. And we met, I think, in New York a few years ago, back when people could meet in person, and we have a lot to catch up on, so people can just listen to us eavesdrop together on our literary conversation here. Also, you're encouraged to submit your own questions in the chat, and I will read them aloud for Julia so she can answer whatever it is you guys want to know. But this is such a great book, Better Luck Next Time. It's nostalgic, and it's lively and funny, and it's set on a divorce ranch. It's full of unforgettable characters, and Julia has agreed to read a short bit of it to start us off.
I actually have the special Barnes & Noble edition here, which has 3 bonus sections in the back, which is unbelievable to me. Before I start to read, though, I have to say, the first book of Julie Schumacher's I ever read was Dear Committee Members, which is the funniest book that has ever been written on the face of this earth. And then the follow-up, which is called The Shakespeare Requirement, is also deeply hilarious. So you need to get that too. And I told so many people we're doing this together, and they were all like, Julie Schumacher, oh my God. So basically everyone is here to see her, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is read just the first page of the prologue. And when I get to the bottom of the page, tools down, I'm not reading another word. So get ready, strap in. Tennessee, 1988. Yes, you've come to the right place. Dr. Howard Stovall Bennett III, at your service. Hand me that magnifying glass, will you? And I'll have a look at what you got there. Yeah, that's me, all right. The tall one in the beat up Stetson, surrounded by all the ladies. You know, when I first got that hat, I had to run over it in the ranch's station wagon, so it didn't look too new. I must have been, let me see now, 24, 25 years old. Hard to believe I ever was that young. I was flat broke, but I was pretty then. And jobs were hard to come by during the Depression. If somebody offered me one, I took it. Working on a dude ranch outside of Reno that catered to the divorce trade beat the heck out of digging ditches. I can tell you that. Some men are born gigolos, others have it thrust upon them. That's the little joke I always told myself in later years when a nurse or one of my fellow doctors noted the excellence of my bedside. Okay, that's the end of page 1. You'll have to get a copy to know what the end of that bedside was.
So, and with this new Barnes & Noble edition, you've got the photos in the back. These are photos of your family, you know, and I know there are real life inspirations behind and sources behind the book, but would it have been really hard to include those photos if all the people in them were still around? How would they? Well,
my mother is still with us. She's 92 years old and she's in a retirement home. So once you read the book, and I assume many of you have, you will understand where I got a lot of that part from. And my father, if he were still alive, would be 104. So it's probably just as well that he isn't. But he, in real life during the Depression, worked as a cowboy on one of these divorce ranches. And, you know, when he only told a couple of stories about it that were really funny, but he didn't really talk about it that much. And by the time it was interesting to me, he was no longer able to tell the story. So this is a lesson to everybody out there. Ask your parents their stories while you have the chance, because, you know, it never occurred to me, oh, everybody's father didn't work as a divorce cowboy when they were young and pretty. So anyway, lesson learned there. But it was kind of nice because I went to Reno to do a lot of research for this book. And I went to the Reno Historical Society.
Mhm.
And I spent a week there, and everybody there was very excited. They were trying to help me find some trace of my father's time there. We never could, because I don't know where he worked or how long he was there. You know, it could have been a month, could have been years, who knows. But what was nice about that was it sort of set me free. Like I didn't have to stick to, I mean, the facts of the story are true, even though the story's made up. The backgrounds are true. So that was a long answer to a short question, Julie.
No. And so, you know, so many writers will sort of deny the real life roots of what they're writing. And, you know, especially there's a quote I have on my desk from someone or another saying that when a writer is born into a family, that family is finished.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Enjoy. But, you know, there's so much affection in the way that you know, take these real life people and turn them into fictional characters with another whole host of people around them. So
yeah,
you didn't worry about the real life sources or.
No. And you know, what's interesting is like my mother was a doctor in real life. And so she, like I had various pockets of knowledge. Like I knew that my father had done that. I grew up on a horse farm, so I knew a lot about horses. And my mother, I had all my mother's like medical stuff where she'd be on the phone during dinner and, you know, talking about like somebody's bowels. Well, just, you know, just put them back inside your stomach cavity and come into the emergency room and I'll sew you up, that kind of thing, you know, and all the grisly medical magazines that were always lying around the house. So I had that. So that really, basically everything in that book came from something that has happened to me, sort of, not really, but.
Well, and somebody's got a question in the chat already asking, who inspired Ward? Ward was an amazing character, and I think I fell in love with him a bit, and I love how he spoke to the audience. So where did Ward come from?
Well, Ward, it's interesting because Ward's temperament is more like my mother's, and Nina's temperament is more like my father's, because my father was one of those guys who did not believe that truth should get in the way of a good story. And that is totally what Nina lives by.
Yeah.
And there's actually a point in the story where she says, somebody says you're a liar. And she says, actually, I'm more of a fibber. You know, when it matters, I tell the truth. And like, that was sort of like, to me, the thing that my father believed in and that I hung Nina on too.
Yeah.
Because,
yeah.
So, but Ward is pretty, I mean, I kind of loved Ward too. I don't know if this happens with you, Julie, but don't you just like love everybody by the end of it, of every book that you write?
Yeah, you have to. I mean, I think even the people who are morally questionable, you've got to be in love with your characters.
Yeah, because like Nina, at first I thought Nina was the bad guy, the villain in this. And my editor was like, Julia, she's the hero. And I was like, oh yeah, she is the hero. And so once I realized that, it unlocked her. And there's like a whole like skein of the story where they have these costumes from A Midsummer Night's Dream. And there's like one that's a fairy costume, and Nina just takes to wearing it all the time because I was like, she's like the fairy godmother. Yeah. And that made me, in my tiny like brain, that made me so happy. I was like, it's like, it's a metaphor, Julia. Look what you've done here. Exactly. Score, right? So.
And somebody wants to know if you're in the process of writing another book. And I know when you and I have talked before, you mentioned, you know, how much this book took out of you.
Oh my God.
You know, in what way was that different from Be Frank with Me? If you're writing another book, how is it the struggle different every time?
I hope it's not like it was this time. With Frank, it was hard. It really that book really made me laugh, but nobody knew I was writing it. My family did, but they kind of, you know, because, you know, I started writing Frank when I was 50, and it was vaguely embarrassing to me to be going, well, I'm going to be a novelist now. But at least we live in LA, because if we lived in New York, it would be super embarrassing because like everybody's writing a novel. Here it would be a screenplay. So but I wrote it, and I had like the luxury of not having a peanut gallery.
Yeah.
But and then that book came out and it did really well, which is a shocker. I mean, that was delightful. But then every time anybody saw me from then on, the first thing they'd say is like, so you write another book? How's your new book going? Blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, oh my God. And it was really hard to write because I feel like if you heard this thing where people say you've sort of been writing your first book your whole life. So we had a young person who stayed with us for 6 months, right as my book was like, they were editing it and it was being put into the advance copy. And she read it after she had moved out, but she would come to our house every Wednesday to have dinner. And so she came in with the advance copy and threw it on the table and said, well, I don't know what's going to be in your next novel because all your good jokes are in this one. It's like, but you see, all the jokes have to go in the first one because there may not be a second one if you don't pour every bit of you. And that's true with every version. Like every novel you write, you have to pour all of yourself into it, or there's not going to be another one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
and another question about Ward. Speaking of screenplays, somebody wants to know if this book were turned into a movie, who would you want to play Ward?
Isn't that interesting? It's funny because I was just thinking about this today because there's a movie called Hail Caesar. Have you ever seen that? It's a Coen Brothers movie. And there's one scene in it is the funniest scene ever made in any movie where there's a cowboy star. And he's played by a guy named Alden Ehrenreich. And Ralph Fiennes is a director, and he's trying to teach him how to be in a drawing room comedy because he was a big Hollywood star. And he can't, everybody should Google it. It's so hilarious. He's trying to teach him how to do it. And he's so good at being a cowboy star, but he's not meant for drawing room comedies. And I think about him a lot. I think, oh, he'd be really good as Ward because he's really funny because not everybody, aside from us, Julie, who is incredibly gorgeous, is hilarious as well. So it's a real, because I remember reading once about George Clooney that when he was 12 or 13, he had Bell's palsy, which paralyzes half of your face. And I was like, oh, that's why he's funny. Because he, like at the worst possible age, this terrible thing happened.
Wow.
So but it would have to be, because there's a part in the book where Margaret, when they interview him, he has to take his shirt off so they can see how he looks with his shirt on, which is to me so funny anyway. And then she's like, it's not really often that you see a boy with sparkle who's muscled up like this.
Yeah.
So somebody who's very gorgeous and also funny. So that narrows it down a little bit.
Gorgeous and funny. That's good.
I know, exactly. My husband is not an actor, so he's not available. So
I wanted to ask you about all the women in the book. Ward is the main character, Sam is a major character, but many more of the characters are women. And it felt, it's a weird female society that they're all trying to get rid of the men in their lives and gain these divorces. So what ways did you think about creating that sort of female dynamic? Program at the beginning from Zsa Zsa Gabor says a girl must marry for love and keep marrying until she finds it.
Exactly. Well, it's really hard. I mean, this is kind of a segue from the question you're asking, but part of why I wrote this book was I had a first husband and that didn't go well. He was a nice person. He was not the right husband for me. And my father had a first wife as well. And I'm the product of the second marriage. And I have a friend who lives in New York who has and my current husband, who I've been married to for 30 years in April, is a delight and really funny and everything about him is great. And my friend has a husband who's just as nice. And we were talking one day and she said, whether you're happy or not in your life depends on who you marry. Because, it's your career can be really successful, but if you're miserable at home, you're never going to truly be happy. And so I was like, oh, that's so interesting. So that's sort of where that part of it came from. But as for the female bonding thing, like it is not fun to get divorced. I don't know if you've ever been divorced, Julie Schumacher, but it's really not my favorite thing to do. So, and anytime you have a traumatic experience that you go through with other people, it's a real bonding experience, and also when I was in college, I lived in a sorority house for 2 years. And I just loved, like when I was writing all the women together, I would think about that a lot, like the way we would eat off of each other's plates. And the most fun was like talking about everything the day after it happened. And so I was trying to put that in. And then I also love the fact that the women are kind of in charge here. Like the guys are eye candy and the ladies are running things. And that made me super happy because it's galling for Ward to be like, sort of like poo-pooed. It's like, he's just pretty. Look at him.
Well, somebody's got a follow-up question in the chat to that, asking, given that the book is centered around women and women's interactions, why did you choose a male narrator?
Because my father was that was the starting point. But then I may have told you this story, Julie. I was thinking about it when I was writing it, when I first started writing it. And one of my favorite books is True Grit. And I also love Remains of the Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about the two of them, and I went, oh my God, I'm writing True Grit meets Remains of the Day, because the cowboys are the butlers. And then also, like, I also love Gentlemen Prefer Blondes with Anita, that Anita Luce wrote. And I was like, the cowboys are the chorus girls. So this guy who has been like, he was like all that in a bag of chips. He was going to go to medical school, you know, go to Yale, go to medical school. Everybody's going to be like after him. Suddenly he's reduced to being the chorus girl. So to me, that dynamic was unbelievably interesting. And, you know, there's a movie called The Women.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, remember that? And it's from their point of view. So that's been done. So this to me seemed much more interesting, but it started because it was my father. So
yeah, good.
But it entertained me to no end to think how it would gall him every time they would like sort of make light of his background.
Mm-hmm.
So, because my father was famous for stuff like that. So like if somebody made fun of him because of his accent,
Mm-hmm.
he would always come up with some kind of like he sat down in a movie theater once and a woman sat down next to him and said, "Are you Southern?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, good, I can take my shoes off." So he, at the end of the movie, just reached down and picked up her shoes and like walked out with them and left them in the lobby to just sort of say, you know, come on. So
wow.
Anyway, I was very lucky in my parents is that I got a lot of material out of both, both of them.
Mine it. You got to mine that stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's just lying on the ground otherwise, you know, so.
Somebody's asking whether you had a favorite character.
I did. I loved Sam the best because he just like broke my heart. He was just, and he was just so like unassuming, and like the fact that he could snatch the tablecloth. I really loved that. My husband liked the Zeppelin the most.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, that's because she's me. And he said, yes, but you're also Nina. And I said, well, Nina and the Zeppelin are kind of the same character. They're just at different stages in their life. But yeah, Sam, he just really, just like when he gives her his hat and says, I have another, and you know that he doesn't have another one. It's just, that is the generous guy. So I loved him.
And someone's asking the Grove and Studio City.
Oh, those are Barnes and Nobles that are close to me. And I have signed copies of the Barnes and Noble special edition with 3 added bonus features.
Oh, okay.
And both of those.
That's not in the book. What am I? I'm not understanding.
No. That's where they have signed. There are some actual, because it's so impossible to get signed books now because of the pandemic. So, but I braved going to both of those. And the first one, the one at the Grove, I went to buy one to give to one of my friends because he's mentioned in the extra, you know, the special bonus, like it doesn't say his name, but it's his family.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to send it to him. So I just bought one to send to him. And I said, you know, I wrote this to the woman, and she went, what? And then she took her walkie-talkie off of her belt and said, we've got an author here. And people came from every direction carrying stacks of books. So I signed everyone in the store.
The first time I signed a book in a bookstore, I went in and said, I'm here, I'd like to sign books. I thought, well, they should ask me for ID. You know, I could have said, James Patterson.
Yes, exactly.
Sign your books. But yeah.
You know, I had to be frank with me at Diesel Bookstore, which is a really fabulous bookstore here. And they gave me a big stack of them. And there was, at the very bottom of the stack was a book by Charles Bukowski. And I was like, I could just sign this too. Who's going to know? So.
A reader is asking if you always knew that Ward would be telling this story as an old man. How much of the book did you have planned out? Did you know that would be the ending? Did you know where?
I knew he was going to tell the story. I knew he was telling it to. The funny thing is, like, I always in my head, well, I wrote this book 3 times. It's no fun to write a second novel. The first version, did I tell you this already? The first version was in 3rd person. Because my first book had been in 1st person, so I was going to try. And my editor was like, I don't know. I mean, you're all like voice and throwaway jokes. You might want to rethink this. So I started again. And then I wrote the 2nd version. And she said, this is not a verbatim statement. I love the prologue. I hate the rest of it. She didn't really say I hate the rest of it, but she was like, the prologue's the best part. And I agreed. I don't remember what the rest of it was at this point. So I started again, then it was okay. But I thought I was writing this one in first person as well. But apparently if you address a you, it is second person. Imagine my surprise. I guess I didn't learn that when I got a grad, when I went to UVA and studied English. But anyway, the last chapter was always going to be in third person. And then you were going to find out exactly who he's talking to. So, but then as it turned out, I had to do the whole thing in second person. But I always knew he was telling it to somebody and that he was an old man, because to me, I'm going to tear up. I can't say this part, but for my mother to be in an old folks home after she delivered thousands of babies. Anyway, it was so important to people's lives, and then just to be there, and we can't visit. Okay, we'll move on to another question at this point.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I have on mascara. This is
keep that mascara from
come back. So anyway,
you see what writing does? It you put your whole soul into it. That's what you were just saying, that you put yourself into this book.
Oh my God! And you know, my husband would like when you go through the last version of your novel. You know how you have to read it like 2 or 3 times for like errors and stuff, and there's a certain tragic happenstance, which I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't read it yet. And I'd get to that part and I would start to cry. My husband would come and he'd go, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I said, "And he'd go, not real." And I'd say, "I know," but it just tore me up every time. So
yeah, you
can see why writers go crazy, because, you have to like, not that we have, but there's still time, Julie. No. So.
Somebody has another question about Ward. Were you deliberately sort of planting little bits of foreshadowing in the novel? There's a part early on when Ward says that he does not have children. Were you?
I was, but I tried to do it in such an incredibly sly way that nobody would find out. But the other thing that was really funny was I knew I wanted him to be named Ward because there's a line early on where he says somebody's trying to remember his name and they say, "Oh, Ward," like a relative taken in, by relatives, like somebody.
Yeah.
But you know the line I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, when I went on a book tour for my first book, a lot of people put us up, which was so nice of them. And my husband has this lovely friend. My husband went to Yale, and his lovely friend from Yale is named Howard Stovall, and he put us up, and I was like, I can name him after Howard Stovall. So poor Howard Stovall now, and he has a different last name. His name's Howard Stovall Bennett III. But like that's sort of where it came from. And I don't know if you have this trouble, Julie, but I have a really hard time naming characters. Do you struggle with this?
Hard. Yeah.
Really hard. And so when I was writing this book, I'd read a bunch of books about the 30s and books about people who'd written books in the 30s and blah, blah. And they were talking about, like, in various of the novelists of that time, they had named characters after friends of theirs. And so that's where Ward came. And then I thought, oh, well, that's a good idea. And I have a lot of new friends who are booksellers, and they would be really excited to have characters named after, because who would be more excited than a bookseller to have a character named after him? And the first bookseller who was really just named one after had done me such a titanic solid. When my son went to college in Chicago, she borrowed her roommate's car and helped me move into his dorm, and her name was Porsha. And so I was like, okay, Porsha's number 1 on the list. So Porsha, and then Will had been, this is such a long answer to whatever question you asked, but Will had been my son had been in a production of Midsummer's Night Dream for high school, and he had this paper mache donkey head that was the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And I was obsessed with it. And I was like, Porsha, okay, well, that's kind of Shakespeare. Oh, I could put the donkey's head in there too. And so then the whole sort of like that whole arc, and then it brought me the fairy costume, which I don't know if I mentioned this, became a metaphor. But it was like, and it's just so crazy, the things you pick up like a magpie, like these little scraps of things, and then it affects the whole arc of the story. So
a reader wants to know, can you talk about that dynamic between Nina and her second husband, Hugh, and then his shadow relationship with Sam, which is, scandalous for the 30s.
Scandalous for the 30s. Well, she and Nina's 6 feet tall, for one thing. And, she's very forthright. And she really feels chapped that because she's a woman, people feel like she can't do whatever the hell she wants to do. Luckily, she's rich, and that helps you get by with a lot. And, when I was a little girl, my mother used to say to me, all my childhood, I kept trying to kiss my elbow because somebody told me that would turn me into a boy, because she wanted to go to medical school and she didn't think it was possible for her, but she got it together and went anyway. And she's one of 2 women in her class. But Nina, that's sort of Nina's thing, was she had been made to feel other because she wanted what she wanted. She wanted to do what she wanted to do. And Hugh was her best friend growing up, and they'd always loved each other. And he was different too. And she really loved him. And then there's like to me, a heartbreaking sentence in that, which is, it's terrible when 2 people who love each other realize they can't live together.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, like I break my heart like 4 or 5 times a day while I read a novel, but it killed me. So that was sort of the whole Nina and Hugh bag. I don't want to go into the particulars in case somebody hasn't read it yet. But.
Yeah, I have one question that's a bit of a spoiler, so I might save that for later.
Okay, save it to then. We can just tell people to go blah, 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 blah while we answer.
Here's maybe a quick question. What is the age difference between Emily and Ward?
Oh, there's a part where they talk about it. I don't know if anybody noticed, but I agonized about this over such a long period of time. She is 10 years older than he is. He's 25, she's 35. And so wait, no, he's 24. And she's 34, and Porsha is almost 14. So there's a 10-year, 10, 10, 10. And so at the end, there's a terrible part where Emily says to Ward, what's going to happen in 10 years when Emily's as old as you, Portia's as old as you are, you're as old as I am, and I'm just old. Yeah. And of course, she won't be old when she's 40, and he gets that, but she doesn't.
Yeah.
But that's the age gap. And I tell you, I agonized. I had timelines to try to figure out like what year they were born, all that kind of stuff. And my brother just like 2 days ago told me that I guess my father told him more than he ever told us because he was the boy. But he said when my grandfather found out that my father was doing this, he had been working construction and then had gotten this job because all you had to do was dance with ladies and be charming. And he was handsome. And that was more fun than digging ditches. And it's like, oh my God, that's like the background I made up for this character. It's the exact thing. So the grandfather found out that he was there and went and he was only 19 and like grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him home. And so that was that. So I suspect he probably wasn't there all that long, but I only found this out like 2 days ago. So anyway.
Okay, here's the possible spoiler question. So some people can cover their ears. Why did you choose the granddaughter meeting Ward?
That is a huge spoiler.
Rather than Steve.
Steve, because if you get the special Barnes and Noble edition, there is the original last chapter, which was in 3rd person, is in there, and it kind of explains why it's her, because I don't want to go into it because I don't want to ruin it. But if you go, get that one and then you'll see and you'll understand why it's her versus Steve. So
did it feel funny to you to include in the book things that you decided, were not quite right or were not up to snuff? There are a lot of writers that want to burn their earlier.
But you know what, Julie, I didn't feel like it wasn't up to snuff. It was just like wrong for the book. But I had like slaved hours over that last chapter and I thought I had done a pretty good job. I'll tell you a funny story too. And I thought it was really good. So I was like, oh, thank God it could be somewhere because it tells you what the narrator does for a living. It explains a little bit more, and so that's in there. And I always knew it, but other people didn't. But my editor had said, you have to write it in the same voice. And so I had to write the last chapter that's in all copies of the book now, at least 472 times. And I could not get it right. And it was just killing me. And the pandemic had started at that point, and both of my children had to be coptered out of college. And so I was never alone in any room of my house ever.
Yeah.
And I had just turned in yet another version of that last chapter. And so I was sitting at the kitchen table and I looked around and I went, oh my God, I'm alone in this room. And so I started crying because I was like, I can't write it. I just can't write it again.
Yeah.
I don't have it in me. So my daughter comes breezing into the kitchen and goes, Mommy, are you crying? I was like, no, Maya, I was just really tired. And she's like, oh, it's okay. If you need to cry, you should cry. And I said, oh, well, as a matter of fact. And she's like, oh, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah. My empathy doesn't extend that far.
Keep it to yourself. But the next day, my editor wrote me and said, it's great. You did it. You finally nailed it. Thank God. Because I don't know what I would have done otherwise. So another long answer to a short question. It's my specialty.
Well, and you talked about, influences, and you loved True Grit. You loved Remains of the Day. In what ways do, other novels creep into your work? I mean, do you feel like you have to be reading books in order to write them?
Oh, when I'm like deep in it, I don't read a lot then, just because like I'm so drained. But when I was a kid, let's see, how did this go? I read a biography of a writer named Richard Yates.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was 13, decided he was going to be a novelist. So he typed the entire Great Gatsby so he could internalize the rhythms of a novel. And I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. So when I was writing Frank, the first novel, I took 3 books that I was really into right then. One of them was Bel Canto. One was I Capture the Castle. Have you ever read that?
Yeah, Dodie Smith.
And the other one, oddly enough, was the first Hunger Games. I can't remember what it's called because my neighbor across the street taught high school, and she's like, I want you to read it and tell me what you think. It's really well written, and it's very well paced.
Yeah.
So I wrote down everything that happened on every page, and it was such an excellent lesson because I never really got how things were put together until I did that. So that was really helpful. And now if I really love a book and I'm trying to figure out how the author pulled off the miracles they did, I'll read it and then I'll instantly listen to the audiobook because a different part of my brain experiences it and it helps me see what they're doing.
Oh, that's interesting. So, I graph novels out. I need to know how they're built. I want to figure out how authors are doing what they're doing.
Oh, yeah. And listen, when I did this one, I reread yet again Dear Committee Members and the Shakespeare Requirement and listened to them. So you remember how back in the day I said, wow, you're really good. Because you did, I don't remember if you did Dear Committee Members, but you definitely did Shakespeare Requirement. I was like, you were really good at that. That's what I was doing, Julie. Now you know the secret is out. So
a reader wants to ask about Porsha. Says that Porsha was not a particularly likable character, and was that intentional on your part to make?
Well, she was 13. Like none of us are likable at 13. And my daughter, I don't know if everybody reads the acknowledgments in books, but like there's a joke in it about how like my daughter taught me like that age. And I said to her, you got to read this and tell me that you're okay with it. Because I think it's a really funny joke, but if it's going to upset you, I'm not going to put it in there. And she's like, no, it's fine. Because she has an excellent sense of humor too. But like, it's like, you just go through, well, it's because you're trying to separate yourself from your parents and you go through, and then she has a kind of a come to Jesus in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so happy to be able to say, look, she's not a terrible person because she makes it all happen. Really. It's Porsha who sets the whole process of finding Ward and makes it start. So,
yeah.
Anyway,
what do you think the book's take on marriage is? Again, given that Zsa Zsa Gabor epigram at the beginning and the whole relationship between marriage and gambling and
it's such a crapshoot. Like that's the thing. Like I can't get over the fact that I was so unlucky in my first marriage and so unbelievably lucky in the second one. And really, it just blows
your skill in choosing.
My skill may have improved somewhat, but I could tell stories for days about that. But it just like if you find the right person, it's like hitting the lottery. Like you're suddenly rich and you're rich for the rest of your life. And it just that was fascinating to me. And so then when I got into the whole Reno and all the history of it and the gambling and everything, I was like, oh, this is kind of perfect because it is such a gamble. And you don't, and then there's a speech, it's on page either 45 or 47, because I wrote that speech for 3 months solid all day long. Type, because I couldn't get it right. And it was so important. And it's where Margaret says, you know, you go in presenting your best self, and then, you know, turns out you're not, it's like a pig in a poke. That's not what he says, but it's more or less sort of, that to me is what the whole novel turns around. So students, please mark that page in your textbooks. But yeah, it was hard.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, speaking of hard, somebody wants to know how long it took you to write the novel.
It took forever. So here's a visual on how long it took. When I started it, I said, I'm not going to cut my hair till it's done. And my hair was about this long. And here's how long it is now. Can you see? It goes right down to where I can almost sit on it. I have trimmed it since I turned it in. And there's a picture, if you go to my author Facebook page, I think there's a picture of it on there, how long it is. And now I feel like, wow, I mean, it's kind of easier to have hair this long because my hair is really curly and it was like all over the place. And every day I would be like, what's going to happen?
What's going to happen?
And now I just wash it and braid it. And then I don't even, some days I don't even brush it. But 3 years minimum. By the time you do all the editing, it's another year. It takes a long time. And I don't know how people who write a book a year, how do they do it? Like, I don't understand. It's so hard.
No.
So.
Do you think you would visit any of these characters again, you know, follow one of them, their trajectory, follow the Zeppelin, follow somebody else? I mean, there's so many great female characters in here. And we learn at the end of the book what happened to some of them, but we don't see it in action.
Yeah, you know, I loved all of them so much. And people ask me that about Frank too, the first book, that character.
Yeah.
He was I mean, if I do say so myself, he was an excellent character. And I think about him all the time. And I think about these people all the time. But it's kind of like, you know how when you knew somebody when you were really young and then you never see them again, they're always in that kind of, you know, their faces still appear. You know, they're all, because I just made friends with somebody who knows somebody I went to college with. And those people are in their 60s now, but I haven't seen them since they were 20. So in my mind, they're always 20. So I think maybe, I don't know. I can't answer that question. A long answer that is not an answer, Julie.
And, you know, back to Hugh, why did you have Sam and Hugh have an affair? Someone is asking that question.
Oh, I went to college with somebody who I just loved to pieces. And he was the funniest, smartest person I knew. And it turned out he was gay, but he never felt like he could tell us. And then later he did. After we were grown and we all lived in New York. And I just thought, oh my God, that's just so sad that he thought it would make us think differently of him. And so that was sort of who I was thinking about. And just like that, I don't know, it's just so hard to be in a time where you're out of place. Because I remember that friend of mine saying to me in New York when he was telling me about it, he's like, there's no place for me. And I just thought, no. You're here all the time. Yeah. I'm going to start crying again. You gotta stop asking these questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. So anyway, that was why. I wanted that to have a happy ending. So.
Did you immediately know? I mean, you knew who Ward was really quickly, right off the bat. What about some of the other characters? Did you know right off the bat who Nina and Emily were going to be? The Zeppelin, some of the other women. Did you come upon their characters page by page as you went along?
Well, you know, like I said, Nina was going to be the villain, but then she clearly wasn't. And Emily, I don't know where, like, who I patterned Emily. I'm like, I know there's a human being who I physically patterned Emily on in her voice as well. She owns a bookstore. But Emily's name is actually straight up the name of somebody who works at E-City Bookshop in Washington, D.C. Her name is Emily Summer. But and the Zeppelin, just that joke came to me because I was thinking because I read so many books about the 30s and I was reading about the Hindenburg, and then I immediately had that, there's a joke where she says, don't light a cigarette around her, she may explode. And then I was like, oh, that would be really funny to have like a person who is that person. Yeah. And then she was sort of also the person that you think, oh, she's kind of an idiot. Because you know how you meet somebody and you write them off. And then as you get to know them, like that was really important to me in the book. Like Ward comes to realize, oh, the Zeppelin is wonderful. And there's a point where he is able to get his family home back and she's who he wants to tell.
Mm. Mhm.
I'm going to start crying again. This is awful. I think I should have started drinking an hour ago or something. I feel very deeply. So
I know you do. It's lovely.
next time, no mascara, right? Anyway,
All right. I hope this question doesn't make you cry.
we'll see.
At some point in the book, Nina tells Emily, "You don't learn as much from success as you do from failure. That's why I am wise beyond my years." So, what's your take on failure and its uses?
Oh my God, there's, because I've said this to my children a lot because sometimes they had reverses, and my brother and sister and I were all really smart and things came easily to us. And I couldn't, once I had my own kids, I was like, oh, I don't understand how they're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you grow up and you get out in the world and you've never had a turn, it's like all the kids that get into Harvard, and they've been micromanaged and then they fall apart when they get to college. And so I would say to my children all the time, it's good to get these things over with, when you're 12, because we're here with you.
Yeah.
Instead of being grown up and having it happen and you're living in an apartment, all by yourself. So I don't know if that answered your question. I've spent a lot of time by myself lately, can you tell?
Yeah, I know. I hear you. I get that. Let's see. Reader is asking, you touched on this a bit already, but what's the writing process like for you? Other than tortuous.
Tortuous, indeed. So here's what I would do. I would get up in the morning.
Also, like your writing habits and things. I think that's interesting to people. Are you
I'm about to
kind of writer?
I would, once the kids were big, like when they were little and I was writing Frank, I had to write frantically while they were at school because I had to deal with them. But then when I had the luxury of more time, I would rewrite in the morning and I would write new in the afternoon. Mm. And I had a big piece of cardboard attached to the closet here that I used Post-it notes and push pins. That's the key. Because if you just use Post-it notes, they flitter away. So every chapter I wrote, I would write out the chapter on a Post-it note. I don't know if I have one of them here. And I'd pin it to the board so I could keep track of what I'd written. I wasn't a person who planned in the future, but because I would go back and forth so much, it really helped to be able to find it. And I would write the first and last line of every sentence on another Post-it note and stick them up. And I had what I call sequences where things that happen over 3 or 4 chapters, like they go to the lake or whatever. That would be on a different color Post-it note. So I could keep track of the whole story as I wrote it. People who can do it ahead of time, man, I don't know how they do it, but that's my technique. I was very serious and I worked really hard and I never spoke to anybody who didn't live in the house with me. And I only went to the gym and I'm super gregarious. You may have guessed. And so I was closing in on the end. I was like, I'm about to get out of the slam. And then when I got out of the slam, the whole world was in. So I haven't seen my friends in years, basically.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the women in the book who are all undergoing these divorces, they're very chatty about the husbands who they hope to divorce soon. But the person who's being secretive really is Ward, about his background, his parents. Why does he not share that information about his past, who he is? Why is he keeping that secret?
Well, there's a part in the beginning where he says, when Margaret interviewed him, she probably wouldn't want to have some snobby, formerly rich boy working for her. She was going to want somebody who was going to work hard. So he and then once he started, you know how that is. You have to keep it up.
I had to keep it up.
Yeah. So anyway.
Well, we're supposed to wrap up soon. So I'm going to ask you if there's a question you wish someone would ask you about this book. About this book?
Oh, I don't know. I thought you were going to ask me what I wanted for dinner, and I was going to give you a long list. Oh, I know what it is. I do have an answer for that because this is so cool to me. It's more of the crazy places you get your inspiration from. I had a friend who's a librarian in New York, and she had one of her fellow librarians is an installation artist. And her friend, her name's Julia Weist, and she wanted to get a sentence in a novel. And the sentence was, "Why is the fish crying?" And so my friend Carolyn asked me if I would try to get Julia's sentence in my book. And so I said, I'm on it. And so the only way I could come up with it is that whole scene at Pyramid Lake, that's like something they say to each other.
Mm.
And I wrote this whole long scene because of that. And it was my favorite scene in the book. And like, what a crazy circumstance that it would come about that way. So I'm very grateful to her for that. So anyway.
Bits and pieces from everywhere.
I know, man. It's crazy. So this was so fun. I feel like it was just the two of us.
It's
I hope there are other people here that may be
chatting.
So.
All right. So everybody's got to go out if you don't have this book yet. Also, books make great gifts. Anybody who's got a birthday coming up, anniversary gift, Valentine's Day.
There are pictures of my father and his eye candy day and my mother, who's 16 in that picture and looks like she's 45. Like how when they would take those studio shots in the old days. Oh. So you can see all that stuff in there. So anyway, this was so fun. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you. All right. Everybody read.
Yes, please.
It's a good time for reading.
Yes. And this one's fun. It's mostly funny. And then there's somebody reviewed it and they said it's 23 chapters of fun and then 3 of heartbreak. And I was like, ooh, that's exactly what it is.
That's the right ratio. That's good.
I know. So, all right, guys.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.